Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir. Thank you to my distinguished senior colleague for giving me an opportunity to reply to all the honorable members that spoke. I was obviously making notes of everybody who has spoken. There are 25 people who have spoken, so I'm not going to go through the list. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm standing between you all and dinner, so I don't want to go through that list. But we had very distinguished colleagues, many of whom have been architects of India's economic policies over the last few years who have spoken. I also had my good friend Derek who spoke, and I think Derek was trying to be a thorn in our side, but I hope he'll agree that I rose to the occasion. But in any case, I also want to commend the fact that we had two newcomers. We had two newcomers who gave maiden speeches, and since I'm a relative newcomer as well, I want to recognize them and I want to commend them on the speeches that they gave today. As we begin the discussion about the appropriations bill, there's been some concern, which many of you also expressed, and which has been expressed in the media as well, that there is a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces don't fit together. There's a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces don't fit together. And so part of what I want to do today, and because many of you picked up some of these pieces and wanted to discuss them, is to try and put that puzzle together so that it's clear to all of us in this chamber, in this house, but also clear to people in the country how our policies fit together. And I think there are four very important pieces of the puzzle that we need to think about. The first important piece of the puzzle, of course, is the economic situation, and there are a number of people who spoke about that. I'll very briefly allude to it. The second very important piece of the puzzle also is, what is our economic philosophy? What is the framework of our thinking about economic policy, and how did that inform the budget and what we've been doing as far as economic policies are concerned? That's a very important piece of the puzzle as well. And when I get into it, I think that some of the honorable members will realize that if they have a disagreement with us, and if we have a disagreement with them, which was of course reflected in the hustings, then that disagreement is one of principle and philosophy. And so if they don't like our policies, so be it, because we come from very different points of the spectrum on those policies. So that's the second big piece of the puzzle. The third big piece of the puzzle is the policies that we have put in place in the budget and in some of our ideas and so on that we have also discussed. And then finally, what is happening on execution? And as far as execution is concerned, many people have spoken about execution as well. The fact is that execution, this is a budget, and obviously the execution happens downstream. So while it's interesting and important to speak about execution, the reality is the proof of the pudding will lie in the eating, and so we'll have to see how the year progresses to see whether the execution is up to the mark, and it should be, because we are obviously paying a lot of attention to that. So those who spoke and criticized us on execution, I would suggest to them, be patient, because we'll have to see what happens during this year. So those are the big pieces of the puzzle that we should be talking about today. Let's first talk about the first piece of the puzzle, which is, what is the economic situation that we are dealing with? Now, Honorable Leader of the Opposition spoke at length about the policies of the UPA government, and the Honorable former Prime Minister is here, who is, of course, the architect of those policies. And we also know what the result of those policies were. And he spoke at length about the social sector spending and all that happened. And I'll just point to a couple of numbers which I think are very important, which I'll suggest that the House take notice of that, because it demonstrates part of what we had to deal with as we put our policies together, which is that, as Honorable Leader of the Opposition said, when the global economic crisis happened, a number of stimulative fiscal policies were put into effect. And those policies, as you know, in fact, this is in the budget at a glance number, set of numbers which you'll find, is that in 2008, 2009, the fiscal deficit went from 2.5%, which is what it was, to 6%, to 6.5%. Then in 2010, 2011, it was 4.8%, and then 5.8%. The stimulative policies that you put in place then resulted in a really, really high fiscal deficit, which was completely unsustainable. The whole world recognized it. And as a result of that, of course, inflation skyrocketed. We know that as well. And in fact, even more troubling, tax collection as a percent of GDP also dropped dramatically. And it was this set of economic conditions we inherited when we came into office in May 2004. We had a current account deficit that was out of control. The rupee had just gone to 68 to the dollar in August, September 2013. We had current account, as I said, high current account deficit, high fiscal deficit, We had a situation where inflation had been running at 8 to 12% in a sticky and entrenched way. No, if I may, just let me finish and then you can come. If I may, let me just conclude. Let me just conclude this point and then you can speak. Therefore, and I'll just summarize 2 or 3 points, and this was the context within which we put the budget together. We therefore were in a situation where tax to GDP was running at 10%, roughly 10%, which is very low when you compare it to other major economies. Debt to GDP was over 60-65%, which is very high when you compare it to other emerging market countries or other developing countries. And the interest expense as a percent of tax of collection was 36%. So we had a situation where it was important, because of high inflation, high fiscal deficit, that we pursue prudent monetary policies and also put in place the fiscal consolidation that was necessary. And that was the context, that was the backdrop to the budget. I will yield now.
That's all. No,
As I said earlier, Honorable Mr. Chairman, sir, as I said earlier, I'm standing between you all and dinner, so this is something that we should postpone for a separate discussion. It's a long discussion. A lot of people have opined on this. I'm not going to get into the details. I'll just make one clarifying point to the honorable member. He's a very learned, knowledgeable man, which I'm sure he'll appreciate. And that is a difference between stock and flow. What happens is, when you have a fiscal deficit that's running at a very high level for a long period of time, you build up your debt to GDP. And when you build up your debt to GDP, that stock, which is what we inherited, we have to work down. We have to once again bring it down to a level that the trends, some of the trends were in place that you're saying, that is indeed correct. But in total, given the fact that we still had to put it right, we had to be able to be in a situation where we could in fact do the fiscal consolidation that was necessary, that you had brought up to those levels. Fiscal space was compressed, and that is important to realize. We also know, as far as the overall economic situation is concerned, that we have benefited from the global commodity cycle. It is indeed correct that oil prices have come down, which gave us the cushion to be able to get to a situation in this budget to really increase our spending on infrastructure and some other vitally important programs. So yes, we have of course benefited. The truth of the matter is, given the macroeconomic situation we had inherited, if we had not had the tailwinds, of a benign external environment, maybe it would have taken us not just 1 year, but maybe 2 or 3 years to correct the imbalances, the stock in the past. So we benefited, and that is to the benefit of everybody in the country. But we did inherit a situation that was dangerously unbalanced, and I think that all macroeconomists and all observers of the economy will agree. You may disagree, that is your choice, but that is indeed the situation. So that is the first piece of the puzzle, which is what was the economic situation that went into thinking about the budget, which required prudent monetary policy and continued fiscal consolidation, which is the point I wanted to make. Now let's talk about the economic philosophy. A lot of people have said that they have trouble understanding what the economic philosophy is, but I will say it very clearly and plainly and simply. And I would say that what I am saying is exactly what is in our party manifesto before the national elections, which was in the president's speech after we took office, which was in the first budget, which was in the president's speech thereafter, and which was reflected in this budget as well. So if you go through and you look at our economic thinking and what our overall economic objectives are, I think they've been very consistent through all these very important documents. And plainly said, here's what it is. What it is we are trying to build the productive capacity of India's economy. The productive capacity of India's economy. In that sense, it is in fact different from what I think the previous regime, my understanding of it, which I submit is my understanding, was more of a demand side view of the world and less of a supply side view of the world. I think our view is more of a supply side view, where we want to build the productive capacity of the economy, which of course means that we are investing both in the hard assets that are required, the roads, the bridges, the highways, the ports, all of those that are required as far as the hard assets of the economy are concerned, as well as the soft assets that are required to power the economy forward. And the soft assets are, of course, the human capital. It's, of course, the health of our people. It is, of course, the skills that they have. As my colleagues and my honorable member spoke earlier, if you don't have the skills, you will not have the job. So obviously we understand that, and that's why we have a skill development ministry. So we're building the productive capacity of the Indian economy. That really is our overall goal. And we are sure that if we do it that way, if indeed we build the productive capacity of the Indian economy, what we will get, because we are also pursuing a balanced energy policy as well, that we will get the sustainable growth that we need, not a growth that outstrips our ecological carrying capacity, but the sustainable growth that we need to be able to power the economy forward in a non-inflationary way without the supply side bottlenecks that is required to be able to sustain growth through the cycle over a long period of time, over a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. We talk about China. China over 3 decades has been able to grow at 9% a year because in fact they have pursued more of a supply side approach. So we definitely have to do that, and that in fact is the way we are thinking about it. That is the overall objective, because if we are not able to grow 7, as Honorable Finance Minister and Honorable Prime Minister have said many times, if we are not able to grow 7, 8 or 9 or 10% a year for the next decade or two, we will not be able to absorb the young people, the 1 crore people a year that are entering the workforce. So as Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Finance Minister have said many times, our number one priority is job creation, but that job creation is only going to happen if indeed we are able to ensure that the economy grows quickly and does not get into a boom-bust cycle if inflation again comes up. That's the overall objective. Now, how do we plan to do it? What are the principles? What are the economic principles we want to follow if indeed we want the economy to grow in that non-inflationary sustainable way? Well, we spoke at length during our budget speech. Honorable Finance Minister spoke at length about this. Honorable Prime Minister has spoken, and many of you alluded to it as well, which is the first and very important principle that we are following is the principle of cooperative and fiscal federalism. I will get into that in detail because many of you have questions about it. But fiscal federalism, cooperative federalism is the first important principle that we are following, and we've demonstrated that. Secondly, and we've said this before, we have said that we believe in empowerment, not in entitlement. And what that really means is कि हम लोगों को साधन देना चाहते हैं. लोगों को साधन देना चाहते हैं, खोखले अधिकार नहीं देना चाहते. क्योंकि अगर हम उनको साधन देंगे, उनको रोजगार देंगे, उन्हें स्किल्स देंगे, तो वो अपनी ज़िंदगी को खुद अपने आप बेहतर बना सकते हैं. और अगर हमें वो साधन देने हैं तो ज़रूर हमें उनको शिक्षा भी देनी है, हमें स्वास्थ्य भी देना है. तो we have an empowerment view, not an entitlement view of the world. That's a second very important principle. The third very important principle, which Honorable Finance Minister has spoken about as well, is that we are pro-market, pro-business, we are pro-market, pro-business, and we are pro-poor at the same time. हमारी सरकार गरीबों की सरकार है, गरीबों को समर्पित सरकार है, किसानों को समर्पित सरकार है. सुनो भाई, सुनो. और अगर आप लोगों को कोई, अगर आप लोगों को इसमें गलतफहमी है कि कोई कई दिनों के बाद आकर इस विषय पे बोलने लगे हैं, अगर आप लोगों को गलतफहमी है कि हम लोग किसी के अर्जिंग पे या किसी के होने के कारण हम लोग ये बोल रहे हैं, मैं आप लोगों को याद दिलाना चाहता हूं कि 20 मई को जब माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी आकर पार्लियामेंट्री पार्टी के नेता बने, तो उन्हें उस समय जो उन्होंने भाषण दिया, और वो बहुत ही एक ऐतिहासिक भाषण होगा, बहुत शानदार भाषण था, तब उन्होंने कहा कि ये सरकार अगर सरकार है तो गरीबों की सरकार है, और ये सरकार गरीबों को समर्पित है. तो ये मत समझिए कि कोई ये नई सोच है. ये हमारी सोच जनसंघ के ज़माने से है, और अगर हम लोग इस विचारधारा से जुड़े हुए हैं, क्योंकि हम इसमें विश्वास करते हैं, इसे भरोसा करते हैं, इसे किसी की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है कि हमें ये सिखाए. सर्टिफिकेट देने की ज़रूरत. बहुत बढ़िया. और इसके साथ साथ माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी ने भी कई बार कहा है कि हमारी सरकार जो है, इट बिलीव्स इन मिनिमम गवर्नमेंट मैक्सिमम गवर्नेंस. मिनिमम गवर्नमेंट मैक्सिमम गवर्नेंस, अ पॉलिसी ड्रिवन स्टेट without discretion and the kind of corruption that we have seen. And we believe in governance and transparency, and we don't need any doubt to us what governance and transparency means, because everything we have done, whether it is the coal auctions, whether it is the spectrum auctions, whether it's the manner in which we have appointed people, demonstrates that governance and transparency, because it is a core principle that we abide by. This is our economic philosophy. I explained what our objectives are: to build productive capacity, and happy to explain it in more detail if anyone wants more information on it. And these are the principles, as Honorable Finance Minister and Honorable Prime Minister have spoken about many times, that we live by, and that is reflected in our policies. And now I will come to the third part of the puzzle, which is what are our policies. Now in this budget, and Deputy Chairman sir, know that I spent many years as a management consultant. And one of the things management consultants are quite good at, sir, is benchmarking. So we spend a lot of time looking at other countries, other companies, And yes, I spent a lot of time looking at other budgets too. I have a legacy with budgets. I've spent a lot of time looking at budgets, starting with 1990 when my father presented a budget that never saw the light of day. So I have been following budgets for a very long time, more than 24 years. And I'm very glad that the Honorable Prime Minister is here because I have studied his 1991 budget very closely. I meant the former Prime Minister. I have studied his budget very closely. And in fact, for this budget, because Honorable Finance Minister and I wanted to make sure as we put this budget together that it reflected the best thinking of the last many years. I actually sat down and I read all 24 budget speeches after the liberalization budget of 1991. I read all of them because I'm a consultant and I needed to benchmark ourselves. I needed to benchmark ourselves and understand what does a good budget mean. There were high expectations of this budget. And so I wanted to understand what does a good budget mean. Now this is obviously subjective. I'm not claiming by any means that this is something that is truly objective. But as I went through and I read all of these budgets, and I particularly pulled out 4 or 5 of those budgets, and I'm proud to say I thought 2 of those were my father's budgets of 2000 and 2001. What I realized was that the best budgets had somewhere between 8 to 12 big ticket reform measures. 8 to 12 big ticket reform measures. Now, as I said, this is subjective and some members may not agree, Deputy Chairman, sir. But by my count, and I've discussed this with many outside experts, by my count, the budget that we have presented, and I have it here and I'd be happy to share it with anyone who's interested, and I will not go into it in detail, has 20 big ticket, high impact, big buying reform measures. I'll give you just a few. Cooperative federalism and the commitment to a GST date of April 1, 2016. Reduction in corporate tax rates and removal of exemptions, saying we're going to go 30 to 25%. Abolition of the wealth tax. Curbing the black economy through 2 new bills focused on foreign and domestic black money. Monetary policy focused on an explicit inflation objective. A massive increase in how we are thinking about irrigation, which of course is very important for agricultural distress, and I'll come to. Subsidy reform through the JAM trinity that we've spoken about. A massive increase in public investment in infrastructure, railways, roads, the National Investment in Infrastructure Fund, Universal Social Security, which we'll be launching on May 9th, the National Skills Mission, the Make in India program, which means focus on skills and removing inverted duty structures, banking reform through the Bank Bureau, and this is something we can spend hours discussing what we're trying to do there. Things that we're doing to strengthen the capital markets, providing pass-through through the alternative investment funds and the elimination of permanent establishment. A major boost for innovation and entrepreneurship through the Atal Innovation Mission. New thinking on disinvestment. The Mudra Bank for MSMEs. A world-class bankruptcy code to be introduced. The Public Contracts Resolution of Disputes Bill, which has been proposed. And finally, and very importantly, and this is again spoken about by several, gold monetization scheme and the sovereign gold fund. These are 20 big ticket reform measures. Happy to circulate them to any one of you and to spend more time. So these are, these I said the third part of the puzzle is policies. As I said, I'm standing between you and dinner. I won't take up too much time. I'm not going to go into these policies. What I will instead try to do is to take up some of the issues you brought up very quickly. And one of the issues that you brought up, of course, is the devolution to the states. And whether at the end of the day, net, as we say, have the states actually benefited or not in terms of the money that they've got. And if they have got that money, what has happened to social sector programs? I'll address both of those very quickly. First of all, as Honorable Finance Minister said when he spoke in the Lok Sabha, the fact is that after taking into account the devolution to the states, the reduction in central assistance to the state plan, we still find after we run the numbers, and Honorable Mr. Jairam Ramesh spoke about this, I'm not sure where he got his numbers from, but these are the numbers that we have there on record. This makes the states a net gainer of rupees 1.35 lakh crore on nearly 1% of the GDP after taking everything into account. This is the amount of money that has gone to the states in an unconstrained way, 1% of GDP.
Finance Commission.
This is on record in the budget.
These are not my numbers. These are numbers given by the chairman of the 14th Finance Commission.
I don't know where Mr. Reddy got his numbers from. I'm just giving you the I'm giving you the authentic numbers straight from the budget.